Tifu by accidentally becoming my neighbor's personal chef for 3 weeks because I was too awkward to correct a misunderstanding. So this happened fairly recently and I'm still kind of mortified. But honestly, it's gotten to the point where I have to tell someone. A bit of background. I moved into a new apartment building in September. My neighbor across the hall, let's call her Margaret, is a very sweet retired woman in her 70s who immediately welcomed me with homemade cookies. We chat in the hallway and she was always asking how I was settling in. One evening, about a month in, I was cooking a big batch of pasta sauce, like an embarrassingly large pot of it because I was stressed cooking after a rough week. The whole hallway smelled incredible. Margaret knocked on my door to compliment the smell, and I, being the overzealous people pleaser I am, handed her a container. She lit up, said it reminded her of her late husband's mother's sauce. Here's where I messed up, Margaret said. Oh, I'll have to pay you for this. I immediately said no. Don't worry about it. As you do. She nodded very seriously and said, that's so kind of you. I'll leave a note for what I'd like next week. I thought this was a joke. Reader, it was not a joke. The next Monday, there was a sticky note on my door that said, Pete beef stew if you have time. No rush. I stared at that note for a full 5 minutes. And then, because I apparently have the conflict avoidance instincts of a golden retriever, I made the beef stew. I told myself I'd gently clarify things when I delivered it. I knocked on her door. She opened it wearing a little apron, had a whole place setting ready, and looked so genuinely delighted that every word I had prepared just evaporated. This happened every week for 3 weeks. Shepherd's pie, chicken soup, a full Sunday roast. I don't even know how I pulled that off. I kept telling myself this will be the time I explain, and then I would see her face and just not. The breaking point came when she slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a very sweet handwritten card thanking me for the meals, a $40 gift card to a grocery store, and a note that said she'd told her whole book club about her lovely young chef neighbor. I finally knocked on her door and came clean. I explained the whole thing, that I had just been being neighborly, that I didn't expect anything, that I should have said something sooner. I was fully prepared for awkwardness. She burst out laughing. Like, genuine, doubled over, tears in her eyes, laughter. Turns out she had absolutely known it was a misunderstanding from week 2, but my food was so good she didn't want to ruin a good thing. She had been leaving notes just to see what I'd make. We've since established an actual arrangement. I cook a little extra on Sundays and share it with her. She proofreads my work emails in return, which, having now seen her feedback, is genuinely the better end of the deal for me. Edit. Yes. Margaret has seen this post. She says the comment section is funnier than her book club and wants me to tell you all the shepherd's pie recipe is from a 1987 cookbook her husband bought at a garage sale.
Next story, I walked into the wrong job interview by accident. Winged the whole thing, and they offered me the job on the spot. I start Monday. I still can't fully process what happened this week, but here we go. I had a job interview scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. on the 4th floor of an office building downtown. Marketing coordinator role at a mid-sized agency, nothing glamorous, but I needed the work. I was nervous, overdressed, and arrived 15 minutes early because I am constitutionally incapable of being late to anything. I checked in at the front desk, said my name, and the receptionist sent me to the 6th floor. I thought that was a little odd. I was sure the listing said 4th floor, but I figured maybe they'd moved or the listing was outdated. I got in the elevator and went up. The 6th floor was a completely different company. A tech startup with exposed brick walls, a foosball table, and about 12 people who all looked under 30. A woman walked over, shook my hand warmly, said, "You must be here for the operations lead role. I'm Sarah, the co. Come on through." Reader, I did not correct her. In my defense, I had been job hunting for months. I was tired. My brain just went into autopilot interview mode. I sat down. I answered questions. I talked about project management and cross-functional teams and process optimization, things I actually knew from my last job, and the whole conversation just flowed. At one point Sarah said, "Your background in logistics operations is exactly what we've been missing." I smiled and nodded. I have never worked a single day in logistics. Whatever was on the other candidates' resume apparently lined up very neatly with my actual experience by pure cosmic coincidence. The interview lasted 45 minutes. At the end, Sarah said they'd had a strong pool of candidates, but she felt I was the clearest fit and asked if I could commit to a start date. I said yes before my brain fully caught up with my mouth. I left the building in a complete daze. I checked my phone. There was an email from the fourth floor company asking if I was still coming. I had to email them and apologize, saying I'd had a family emergency. I am going to feel guilty about that for the rest of my life. But here's the thing, I looked up the operations lead role on the way home. It pays nearly double what the marketing coordinator role was offering. The team seems genuinely great. Sarah has been nothing but enthusiastic in follow-up emails. I have no idea how any of this happened. The receptionist must have confused me with someone else who happened to have a similar name and was also there at 10 a.m. The stars aligned in the most absurd way possible. Update posted 18 hours later. A lot of people are asking. Yes, I told Sarah the full story before signing anything. She laughed for about 2 straight minutes, said it was the most unhinged origin story she'd ever heard, and then said the offer still stands because the interview spoke for itself. I signed the contract this morning. Edit. To clarify, the other candidate, the one whose slot I accidentally took, did get rescheduled and apparently also received an offer from a different round. So no one got hurt. The universe was apparently just doing some very aggressive career counseling on my behalf.
Grounding going to try to keep this as clear as possible because there are a lot of moving pieces and I've been sitting on this for 3 days now, oscillating between feeling completely justified and wondering if I've blown up my entire family. Throwaway for obvious reasons. My name isn't important. I'm 34. My brother, I'll call him Daniel, is 37. We grew up in a fairly traditional family. My parents have been married for 40 years. We went to church every Sunday, family dinners every Friday. The kind of upbringing that sounds idyllic from the outside. When I was 19 and Daniel was 22, I found out something by accident. I walked in on a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. My mother on the phone, late at night, clearly distressed. The details aren't mine to share fully, but the short version is this. My father had had a brief affair when Daniel and I were very young. My mother had found out, they had worked through it privately, and they had agreed together that no one would ever know. The marriage survived. They genuinely seemed happy. I believed them. My mother caught me listening. She sat me down and asked me, with tears in her eyes, to carry this with me and never speak of it. She said it would destroy the family if it came out. I was 19. I said yes. I kept the secret for 15 years. The wedding. Daniel got engaged 2 years ago to a woman I'll call Claire. Claire is warm, funny, and completely devoted to my brother. I like her a lot. The wedding was last Saturday. Beautiful venue, about 120 guests. Everything my mother had spent 18 months planning down to the last detail. Here's what I didn't know until 4 days before the wedding. My father pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He's always been the steady, composed one. He told me that he had something to get ahead of. He had reconnected, years ago, with the woman from the affair. They had stayed in loose contact, and now he lowered his voice. There was a chance she might show up at the wedding. Not invited, just show up. He wanted me to know so I wasn't caught off guard. I stared at him. I asked why on earth she would come to my brother's wedding. He got very quiet and said, because Daniel is her son too. The floor dropped out from under me. Apparently the affair had been longer than I'd understood. Daniel is not my father's biological child, or rather, there had always been a question, and a DNA test years ago had confirmed it. My parents had known since Daniel was 4. They had raised him as fully theirs, which he is in every way that matters, but the biological truth had been buried so deep that even I, who knew about the affair, had never been told this part. My father asked me, again, to stay quiet. He said they were going to tell Daniel, just not yet, not before the wedding, after the honeymoon, when things settled down. He said it would be the right time then. I told him I needed to think. He took that as agreement. The day itself he spent, the night before the wedding, barely sleeping. I kept turning it over. Daniel was about to stand at an altar and begin a marriage, a new chapter of his life, without knowing something fundamental about who he is. Claire didn't know, and somewhere out there, a woman who was his biological mother apparently felt strongly enough about this moment to consider showing up uninvited. I thought about what I would want if I were Daniel, standing there in my wedding suit. About to say vows, would I want to know? Would I want the choice? I already knew my answer. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were genuinely moving. And then came the moment the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, the traditional line that 99% of the time is just a formality that gets a polite laugh. I didn't stand up then. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a movie villain. I waited. What I did was pull Daniel aside 30 minutes into the reception, before the first dance, before the speeches, before any of it. Just the two of us, in a side corridor off the main hall. I told him everything. The affair, the DNA test, what Dad had told me 4 days ago, what he'd asked me to keep quiet again. I watched my brother's face go through about 14 emotions in 90 seconds. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Does Claire know?" I said no. He straightened up, walked back into the reception, and went directly to Claire. I don't know exactly what he said to her. They were together in a corner for about 10 minutes. Then Daniel went to my parents' table. What followed was not quiet. My mother cried. My father tried to explain. Daniel was, I have never seen him like that, not shouting, which somehow made it worse, just very still and very cold, asking questions in a voice I didn't recognize. Claire stood next to him the entire time, her hand in his. The reception continued around them, most guests completely unaware. A few family members near the table clearly understood something was wrong. My aunt grabbed my arm. At one point and hissed, "What did you do?" at me like I had personally lit the building on fire. The aftermath, Daniel and Claire left early. Not dramatically, they made a quiet exit, thanked the guests, kept it composed. Daniel texted me that night, "Thank you for telling me. I mean that. I need some time." My mother has not spoken to me since. My father called once, said he understood why I did it, but that the timing was cruel. Several aunts and cousins have sent me variations of "You ruined the wedding." One cousin called me a bomb in a white dress. For what it's worth, the wedding wasn't ruined. The photos are beautiful. The vows happened. Daniel and Claire are married. What changed is that Daniel now knows the truth about himself on the first day of his marriage, with his wife standing beside him. I keep asking myself, was it the wrong moment? Should I have waited until after the honeymoon, like my father asked, or would that have meant Claire and Daniel started their marriage on a foundation that had a crack in it, a crack only I could see? Daniel is the one who matters here, and he said thank you, but I'm still losing sleep. So, Eta, update posted 48 hours. Terry didn't expect this post to get the response it did. I've been reading every comment and trying to absorb it. Daniel called me this morning. He and Claire are still on their honeymoon, but he wanted to talk. He said he's been through the full range of shock, grief, anger at our parents, and then something quieter on the other side of it. He said Claire has been his absolute rock. He doesn't regret knowing. He said if it had come out 6 months from now, a year from now, he'd have spent that entire time building a life on something hollow. He asked me one question. How long had I known about the affair? When I told him 15 years, there was a long silence. Then he said, "That's a long time to carry something alone. I'm sorry you had to do that." My brother apologized to me. I cried for about 20 minutes after we hung up. My parents have reached out to Daniel directly. I don't know the details of those conversations and I'm staying out of them. That's between them. My relationship with my mother is complicated. I think it will take a long time. Maybe we get there, maybe we don't. But Daniel knows who he is, and he chose to walk back into that reception and hold his wife's hand. That matters more to me than the table seating and the speeches and all of it. Final edit. For everyone asking about the woman who might have shown up, she didn't. I don't know if she ever intended to, or if it was just my father's anxiety talking. Daniel knows she exists and says he'll decide in his own time whether he wants to make contact. That's entirely his to navigate.